And we are live. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our viewers all around the world. Thank you so much for joining us on yet another episode of the Friday Fireside Chat. So, we've been on a roll recently. We've been doing quite a lot of episodes with all kinds of people across the industry. So, and we've tried to do something different with each time, having different kinds of guests and having a sort of different perspective for each of our episodes. So this time we thought we'd do something a little bit different and a little bit really interesting for our viewers, which is essentially have a sort of back and forth between us, which are the blue teamers, and our guest, who's going to be a red teamer. So I'd like to welcome Het Mehta to our Friday Fireside Chat. Thank you so much for joining us, Het.
Hi,
No
thank you,
problem.
Anish, for thank you for the welcome. So yeah,
Yeah,
the
can you tell us
question,
a little bit about yourself?
yeah, sure. So I'm Het Mehta, and I'm from India, and I work as a security analyst in Accops, which is a product-based company that works it's kind of the solution, for the work from home solution, right? So I generally work with all this the CI/CD pipelines, right? Because we deploy the product as we work in a product-based company. And yeah, I started my journey early, when I was in 17.
Oh wow, okay, it's really early.
Yeah. So
Nice.
yeah,
That's
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 pretty much
awesome.
it. And yeah, I share I'm much active on my social media handles. I share a lot
Uh-huh.
of content for people who want to start journey in security, and I help them to get the enough resources. And I would say
Right,
AppSec
right.
is one of the best one can
Oh,
go
thank
with.
you so much.
Yeah.
That's great. So thank you so much for joining us. You're one of our youngest guests, and you're also you're a red teamer, which kind of brings a fresh new perspective to us because we are typically in the defensive and blue team security side of things. So we are also increasing our library of courses in the offensive security side of things. So I mean,
Yeah.
your perspective would be amazingly valuable for us. That would be so. This is, I think, going to be the start of a brand new sort of direction for AppSecEngineer. We'll kind of go into the entire purple team sort of the purple team perspective for security. So before we start, I'm joined by my colleague Ganga Sumant, who is our resident cloud security expert. You would have seen him on previous Friday Fireside Chats and on some live codes as well. So thanks for joining us, Ganga.
Hey, happy to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. So before we get started, I just like to remind our viewers that yet again we do have another amazing DevSecOps Bundle giveaway going on right now. So we are I have in the description of this of the video on YouTube or LinkedIn, you're going to find if a Google form link. So if you go there and give us your details, your name and your email, and then comment on the video on YouTube, that will increase your chances of being one lucky winner who's going to get the DevSecOps bundle. That bundle is going to contain all the DevSecOps courses, the container security courses, and all the challenges in those learning paths. So it's an amazing bundle of content that you're going to get for an entire year. So I really hope you're looking forward to that. So sign up for that, and one lucky winner is going to get announced next week, and so you can look forward to that.
I just
Awesome.
want to
So
add,
without further, yeah.
sorry, I just want to add as a sneak peek on this one. Uh, we are working on a whole host of DevSecOps challenges. They're about to be released. So,
Awesome.
something to be excited about.
Yeah, so if you actually get the DevSecOps license now, then you're going to be getting all of the content that you will be getting for the next whole year. So, so this is why I brought Ganga along because he's in tune with all of the latest stuff that's coming out. So
Yep.
Yeah, and
great.
I would add that reading through the blogs, right? See, now we know that ChatGPT is there, this all this LLM, this generative AIs are there, so we can easily find any kind of blogs. But actually doing
Yeah,
challenge, that actually makes you that how do you tackle the situation, so yeah, that
absolutely.
works great.
Exactly. Challenges are the way to go. Once you might have learned from a course, but actually getting into a challenge and testing your skills, that's where the real, challenge is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
And okay, yeah, not a promotion, but yeah, just like that. If you want to purchase this AppSec Engineer codes, you can use my coupon HMETA10 for the 10% discount.
That's great. I'm sure you'll share that on your social media as well, and we'll
Yeah,
drop it in the comments later on,
yeah,
so you can check that out as well.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So let's get started, Hit.
Sure.
So for our first scenario, so we are going to be presenting a bunch of blue team or defensive scenarios to you, and you need to figure out, as a red teamer, you need to figure out how you can break these scenarios, how you can break these defensive security controls as a red teamer, and figure out how you can attack them and kind of compromise these systems.
Sure, sure.
So for our first scenario, present day DevOps pipelines are set up to automatically run SAST and SEA scans using tools like SonarQube or DepTrack on push. As a red teamer, would you say that that's sufficient? And what are some of your favorite pipeline exploits?
Okay, it's not sufficient, obviously. So a simple question. If you go to the HackerOne activity, you will find every another day a new bug, new vulnerability submitted by researchers, right, to the prominent companies. Either it's a PayPal, Microsoft. Like, don't they have very good security posture? For sure they do. They are the very big security team set up for that, right? And they have implemented one of the best CI/CD pipelines. I mean, Microsoft is a company that has Azure itself, so they would have one of the best CI/CD pipeline security implemented on their environment. Still, you will find a lot of vulnerabilities. So there is never an answer where you can say, okay, yeah, we are secure, right? So first you have to believe like that. Okay, yeah, your however hard you try to build a good security implementation, it's still going to be vulnerable. Some another attacker who has just learned something very different, right, or just made his own exploit, or something very different, like like what is 0 day, right? So they can simply find something like that. So it is not enough just to have this SST or this SCA scans, or we use this automated tools in our CI/CD pipeline, OWASP, right, or the ballistic proxy. And this depend, like there are some the particular vulnerabilities you will find in a pipeline attacks. So there, the first, the most common that I know is the default credentials. The very very common, because we, being in any environment, we are kind of lazy to remember password, right? So we just
Yeah.
let the default credentials as it is, right? Either being in a security company, or in any organization, right, you are part of. However hard you try, you have multiple passwords to remember, and at some point you'll be like, okay, no one is going to hack you. Let's just make it admin, right? So there are lots of things that you might forget, that what if there is an insider threat who can just get into your machine. The second one I would say is about the authorization and authentication. Now, authentication is something that's part of every technology, right? Either it could be this pipeline attack, right, or the cloud security, or the web application, Android. Everything has authentication and authorization. That's why we are doing security. So no, an attacker can bypass this login or any kind of the security infrastructure. So sometimes we set a default permissions, or just a default configuration about the set of rules that are for this login, or for the normal this authentication purpose. So we have to re-verify all this this rules to see what kind of methods we have set for this authentication, and what are the rules that are defined, right? We either we have this admin role or what, because this is something that interests the attacker. If I'm a red teamer, right now, I won't be directly jumping into admin. I'll be doing some reconnaissance, right, where I'll be looking, okay, what are the documentations. Documentation is something where I can get the information about, right, about the product, or about the APIs, or about the pipeline which they have
Yeah.
integrated. And I can find, okay, this is something that has some roles, right? I can try to look into those roles. I can deploy my own machine to check what kind of roles exist, right? Because that is something, like deploying something by yourself and then attacking is something that's going to be help you a lot as a red teamer. So I will try to deploy a machine by myself. I will try to integrate the CI/CD pipeline, and I will try to perform, okay, what kind of roles are there. And the next would be this security controls. Now there are some things that people just do it for the audit purpose. They be like, okay, we have to implement these checks, that's why we are doing that. But if you look into the logic behind any kind of security control, they are just doing it for the purpose, not to secure. The ultimate goal is not to be like, okay, let's make this hard for the attacker. It's just like, okay, let's pass this audit. We have to follow this checklist. So that is something like in most of the developers or there's a community, like the software developers, engineers, they go through. So they have to implement some proper security controls, not just like the basic one. Okay, it should have this kind of configuration. No, you have to go through the source code. No, CI/CD pipeline attacks does not have like this basic source code like the web application. It has much more like it's much more about this configuration, right? Because you just configure your CI/CD pipeline. You don't develop it by yourself, right? So the best thing is to configure securely. And the last I would say is if there is any kind of lack of segmentation or segregation. Let me give you an example about this segmentation. So have you ever been to mall?
Yeah,
Right.
like a shopping mall, right?
Right, yeah. So what is shopping mall? It's like a bunch of different, shops, right? Different brands. Now you will see that each mall and each shop has a wall in between of them, right? That's what the differentiate the different. So just imagine what there are no walls, right? Okay, every stores are like jointly collaborated. If one of the shop gets breached, right, or robbed, everything is going to be empty.
Yeah, they're all breached. Yeah.
Right. So same goes in CI/CD pipeline, right? If you are just securing only one container, or like you are just implementing same configuration and everything, regardless of whether it's for the public, it's for the internal team, it's for this deployment, it's for the client. You just deploy all of this default configuration that you have made. Okay, I think this is something that is secure to me. No, it's not how it works, right? You have to set your audience, your target, and depending on that, you have to make some changes on that. So just like the example, if one of your instances get breached, your whole company is going to be like it's vanished. It's going to be sold in dark web. Yeah.
Those are some really good points. So just to tackle, I think, a couple of them, not to go into too many details here, but the first point was about default credentials and passwords. Honestly, with every authentication system, the weakest point is always the people.
Yeah.
The moment you trust
Totally.
a person to remember the correct password or like to set complex passwords, you've already lost.
Yeah.
So, in fact, like only today we were working on a method to like automate pipeline security. And I think the correct method to do so would be to have some sort of OIDC platform that is giving tokens to your pipeline at runtime. And this token is only valid for as long as the pipeline itself runs. And this token allows it to go talk to a vault of secrets. And only during that pipeline's runtime, that pipeline has access to the vault for only like, let's say one access or two accesses. So let us say this pipeline has to like build your application and then deploy it onto your production environment. So only when it does the build, it gets access to secrets, and otherwise it doesn't. So like you said, like we try to build systems that are as resistant to the people part of things, where you don't try to give them long-lived credentials, you don't try to give them any default configurations, you try to make the default itself as secure as possible. And as far as segregation and segmentation, yeah, that's that's a pretty big one, because it's also quite a bit of an engineering undertaking. You have to be aware that the engineering cost actually has some benefits to it, and perhaps this also means that you have to have like several conversations with your management, with the people involved, the stakeholders, to let them know that this is something that will bear its benefits in the future and it is worth the time and effort right now.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
If we look into like what some of the ways to implement the security enhancement in pipeline attacks, the first is obviously like having this strong implementation. Like while I was talking about some of the attack vectors, also I mentioned like the reason, right? So we can mitigate those. So the first is obviously the strong passwords. Now it should not be something like your organization name at 123, your own name, right? Or the system Linux at 123, or this common password like there's I love you football, These are some very common password people generally make. There is a rocky.txt, one of the most famous password, brute forcing file, right? An attacker can try to brute force into your account. The second is obviously up to date with your vendor. Either you are using the AWS, GitLab or Azure. Make sure any kind of update they are going to give you, just don't ignore that, because each update contains either a security enhancement, or just fixes of CVEs, some zero days if they are found, right, or some functionalities. So updating, right, and yeah, make sure to have some vulnerability management tool. So, why do we see our topic of this conversation is a CI/CD, pipeline, right, where we implement our security scanners. But what if the whole process is being hacked, right? So, to secure the whole CI/CD process, we have to implement a vulnerability management tool, not like OWASP app. It scans the code, not the CI/CD pipeline itself. We need another tool to scan this CI/CD pipeline, something like that, something that
Yeah.
monitors, something that checks the logs. If any kind of malicious activity has been done to your pipeline, if by, let's say, insider attacker, if you're trying to attack, get fetch something, information from your CSV.
Yeah. Um, cool. Moving on to the next question. Um, so the scenario is like this. Let's say all of my application builds are DAS scanned using Zap before being moved to production. Would you say that's enough to avoid several injection vectors? For example, you have injection or access attacks that happen on my application. Do you think just DAS scanning it with a tool like Zap is sufficient for that?
Okay. So, see, as I said, like, no security is 100% sure, but having the implementation of OWASP app can help you to reduce, some common vulnerabilities, right? Some which can find. See, if you're not going to implement this OWASP app on your CI/CD pipeline, some another attacker who maybe simply run this automated scan, on your system, right? They
Hmm.
can simply find the same bugs which you will get if you would have implemented those checks, or this scanners in your CI/CD pipeline. So instead of that, why shouldn't you just use that by yourself? So you can avoid from some of the most common bugs. If you're
Hmm.
some people attacker can report if you have any responsible program you have hosted. So it is best way to reduce the common vulnerabilities. Now there is something known as business logic bugs. Now these are
Hmm.
something that every tool lacks of. They say nowadays you will find in future, I would say, they will have this A implementation in tools of security for sure, but not something that can actually try by manually, if you use the product by yourself, you know how it works, right?
Hmm.
Okay, this is something that has some limitations. Okay, so I let's try to just bypass the limitations. Now the tool doesn't know how this, what is the purpose of the tool or the software. The tool
Hmm.
doesn't know how actually it's going to be used by the user in the endpoint. All the tool know is just a request and the response. It will analyze the request. It will try to implement some payloads which are again there's a generated payload by the system, right? By default payloads, it will try to implement them. Sure, it will have some bypasses, some encoding of the payload, some lots of things, but still. Now the thing here is that if you know brute accesses,
Hmm.
right? So he's
Hmm.
the person that rides exercise payload each another day of bypasses of Akamai, bypasses of any kind of. Now
Hmm.
he's not a person like, see, even after running all these tools, right? Still he manages to find this bypasses in Akamai, right?
Hmm.
Not something
Hmm.
like Akamai is CDN like in that provide
Yeah.
security. There's a front security check every organization, and he himself try to find the bypass. So
Hmm.
if he can write, so any another user would able to do, maybe if they're not making it public. So
Hmm.
why
Hmm.
do we dependent on those tools? You have a lot of business logics. You can just try to craft your own payload, right? Sometimes you
Hmm.
get to the code, right? You how does it respond? How do you try to analyze this software, and then later you try to craft your own payload, or your own any kind of that the script, if it's kind of the automations things, right?
Hmm.
So yeah. So any kind of injection attack, right? They all have this input things, right? Like you input something either on your query based, or like on this query this cookies, right? Or this header attribute, like or any kind of attribute of the request. So all the must thing is that you have some input, which is the script or the payload. Now you have to do this input validation checks. Now there are some bypasses for the input validation checks that a tool won't, because a tool doesn't understand okay how the response is going to be there, and like how to analyze the response. But as an attacker, you can get okay, this is something you are getting as a response. Let's try to like double encode it. Let's try to like make it more double encoding, right? Okay, it's getting the bypassed. So yeah, checking by manually is something that's going to be the utmost all time. The attackers the topmost thing that AI won't take over.
Yeah, definitely. And circling back to the idea of using something that's out of the box like Zap, uh, you're very right on the fact that business logic is going to change from application to application.
Yeah.
Uh, so on our end of things, what we usually do is use applications like SemGrep or Nuclei. Uh, and these SAST and DAS scanners they do have like a whole set of like publicly available rules.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
like you said, they try to depend on a host of like known injection vectors and source of like XSS attacks and possible RC, getting root or shell access and such things. But the real power comes into letting you write your own rules,
exactly.
because nobody should know your code base better than you do. So really letting you leverage that and get to the point where you're writing specific rule sets and specific templates to try and break apart your particular endpoints. Your APIs are in your hands, and your code is already also in your hands. So letting you know that like these are potential vulnerabilities, and like how you can like track them through your entire code base. For example, SemGrep does something like taint analysis, where if you know there's one piece of code that's already broken, you can follow that through your entire code base and like make sure it is not uh, forming other gateways later on. Or in the case of Nuclei, you can take every single endpoint and just blast it to the point where it's you understand it's as secure as you can get it.
Yeah. So technically, nuclear is something which is a template based kind of like which
Yeah.
checks whether like it matches to this response or not.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really like check the business logic. Like if I'm an attacker, I will try to input this single quote, double quote, the slash to check what are these behavior I'm expecting.
Yeah.
That tool. That's the only thing
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah. So the when you're trying to like get to business logic, I think you would need a SaaS tool. You would need to look at the code itself.
yeah, exactly.
And yeah, so that's where you would try to use something like SemGrep, where you look for like known patterns and try to find those patterns all through your code base.
Yeah.
But yeah, Nuclei is definitely for endpoints only. Yeah.
Running
Awesome.
nuclei on
So
your
moving on
CI/CD
to
pipeline
sorry, go
can
on.
help. Yeah, running there are like some automated tools on your CI/CD
Hmm.
pipeline can definitely help you to prevent from basic vulnerabilities that public can easily find by just running those on their system. So if you have
Hmm.
already run all these tools on your system, at least you're sure that okay, you are not going to receive any kind of reports or like by like being targeted by these common
Yeah.
bugs.
Right. Awesome. So let's move on to our next scenario. So most services or microservices are being provided as API add-ons or plugins. So as a red teamer, what are some of the most problematic APIs you've seen, and how do you break them?
Okay. So APIs, something very interesting in a perspective of security, because API is something like that connects this database, right, to the system, and it kind of works as the delivery man that transmits the data. So you know API, right? OWASP top 10, it has this API top 10 section itself only, because API is something which is you know kind of that you have to make sure it's not very misconfigured, because all your data is going to be easily exfiltrated if it's not properly configured. So if you're talking about the like there's microservices, which are using API, right? How they are kind of, this uh, risk at the security. Now, I have different two different answers for that. So there are some types of APIs, which are different service used. The first is a payment portal, right? For example, PayU, right? In Razorpay, they you have redirected it from the APIs, right? So some payment APIs portal. Then there are some authentication APIs, right, which helps you, this authentication barrier, right, which helps you for the authentication purpose. Or if you're
Hmm.
using any kind of third-party tool for just authentication purpose, for example, Outlook, right? You will get direct to your Microsoft portal, right? I know that. And then there are
Yes,
some
yes.
APIs. Yeah, there are some APIs which monitors your software. Monitor something like SOC. What does SOC? They monitor your logs and all. So there are some
Hmm.
APIs which you have implemented on a system, which monitors all the data. And if it is monitoring, that means it is having the access to the particular data, that a
Hmm.
normal user should not have, right? And
Yeah.
the most critical API is the cloud security. Sorry, the cloud platform is this, either you are using AWS, your Azure, right?
Yeah.
So these are kind of types of API which we use generally in all all products or any software or any service that we are using. Now, you know you will find some Swagger APIs, for the documentation if you are using in your own premises, for these APIs. Now, if you are looking for these attack vectors, the first one is going to be, the again the default credentials. But let's bypass that. I mean, let's move from that, because it's going to be same on every bug, every sorry, every software, the default credentials, right? Even it's there's a normal empty components, it's kind of part of OWASP top 10. But the most common thing that you will find in API is a broken access control and the authentication checks. Now, let me tell you about my story. Once I was hunting for this particular application, and they were having the particular API portal where they were storing the data of users, each data, everything, except password, because passwords being stored in encrypted form, right? Obviously, it's not going to be publicly.
Hmm.
But apart from that, your username, your name, your address, your mobile number, your email address, your IP, if you're if that is you're supporting, so everything was stored. Now I knew that, but I was not able to access that. So I tried to do some fuzzing on this portal, right? This public
Hmm.
port, either it could be public, right? All this API V2 V1. I tried to do the fuzzing, and I tried some manually fuzzing. That okay, let's try. What if being a developer mindset, what to make things easy, I would have implemented something like this. So I tried to do that, and I got in result. I got list of every each of single user of whole that software, every information, right? Either just this name, address, mobile number, email. What else do you need, right? You can easily dump the data. You can sell that
Hmm.
data, right? Or any kind of services. Although we have this DPDP, Digital Personal Data Protection Law, still but it's going to take a time to get in action. But still, companies are still using vulnerable APIs, and they are not properly configured. They are you can simply bypass those 403 forbidden page with some bypass techniques. There are tons of bypass techniques you'll easily find on these tools, right, itself. So in that case, this tool will help you to bypass some case, if the response is getting restricted. There are some list of this bypasses. For example, payload all things, what's one of the great repo on GitHub. This the Swiss army tools. There are lots of there's uh, there is another site I forget by Shubham Shah. So he just puts lots of this fuzzing parameters, right? So you can go for that. Now fuzzing is something that you will check by yourself. You will check, okay, what kind of something that you can create by yourself. There's a word list, right?
Hmm.
Uh, right. So you can look for the SQL injection if the portal is going to have some input validation. You can look for some DOS attack, right? Now some APIs may get down if you do a lot of action.
Huh.
It may cause the lots of stress to the backend, and that's going to lose that what do you say the runtime, right, for the users,
Hmm.
and that will impact the reputation of the organization. So make sure you have implemented this DOS. Make sure you block this particular IP. if it's going to have like multiple requests from
Hmm.
system, right? So yeah, there are lots of things you can look into APIs, but most common is a broken access control. You can try to do some IDORs, right?
Hmm.
Direct object reference. That's like one of the most common bug found in API security and misconfiguration. You can try to manipulate this. You can temper it parameters. You can temper it data. You can temper it inputs to bypass this API checks, and you can also bypass this authentication bearer. That the header that you get in your HTTP request.
Hmm.
This JWT token.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually, what we would do is, as in terms of automation, at least, there is no way to match a human that is sitting and crafting these requests. There's simply no way we can match it. But I think we get pretty, like, one of the major things we do, at least, is we try to use uh, like your task tools like Zap or Nuclei, and they are in turn married to other like automation tools like your Selenium or Robot framework. And the idea is that you write tests that you would do when you're on as a red team, or how you would do fuzzing. I would try and do the same thing on the other side and try to like build up an auto like a list of potential use requests. And the idea here would be like I would have a library that would sort of work on my code base, and instead of relying on one or two developers to like understand the concept well enough to like secure their endpoints and their APIs, I try to hand them an automated list of things that they can like run against their API. And the hope is that my test coverage is as wide as possible. But again,
Yeah.
it's not gonna be enough for a real person with the intention.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think we can move on to our last question after this. Will you
Sure.
take this one, Ganga?
Yeah, sure thing. Um, all right. So the last one is about cloud security. And well, these days, most cloud providers have gotten really good at hardening
Yeah.
their environments and implementing security defaults out of the box. As an attacker, that makes your job much harder, I believe. So, what new strategies have you been employing to exploit cloud environments that are seemingly everywhere these days?
Yeah, it's yeah, one of the kind of tough thing for the red teamer, as this cloud operators, they are getting hard coded credentials, right? They are going to they implement some of the really good security checks, they implement some endpoint detection, right? They
Hmm.
implement some XDR on their portal, right, on their services. They implement insider IDS, this intrusion detection system, right,
Hmm.
for if any external user try to just play around the software. Now the some of the attacks that being a red teamer, see, the foremost the attack is going to be social engineering,
Hmm.
because the reason for that is if you're actually a red teamer, not just a pen testing tester, who's going to check the software, but trying to look for all these other factors besides from application. If you really go to some social engineering techniques, that's going to help a lot. For example, let's say your company is having some cloud operators that I know. I will try to craft some what do you say, there's social engineering drafts. For example, I will try to reach to you in a personal way, right, as a different human, right. I will try to reach out to you as in cloud operator, and
Hmm.
maybe I can give you some service, or the feedback form, right, that you are having with other problems with your system, right. So I can analyze those information. I can get some data about, okay, what kind of the service that you are using and why you're using your cloud, right.
Hmm.
So the first I have to gather some information, because I just can't go to attack this any kind of software, especially
Hmm.
those which are very secure, securely hard coded. The second would be, say, this obviously the misconfiguration. Like however hard this cloud security the cloud vendors has implemented security checks. When a developer is using the product himself, he will make some changes in that. And once you are making some changes, that's going to be affected from the user point. So you must have some of the list of this misconfiguration. Then there is the supply chain attack. There are some side channels attack, right? Something which usually don't we don't do that. We don't even get the result, but we can try that. And for example, let's say this side channel attack, where what we do is, for example, just an example. Let's say I'm having this system of Linux or Windows, and I'm booting that system. Now technically, how do we find bugs in that software is going to we will boot that, we'll start the system, and later we will try to the AD pen testing, whatever kind of pen testing we are going off the Windows host. But the side channel would be something the moment you start the moment you start boot your system, and the moment your system actually gets booted up, the difference, not the difference but the time, all this data which is being going through, I will try to find errors in those, and will get into a system directly, right? So not something like an application level attack, but something from your source, right? So that I can try the side the side channel attack, the supply chain attack. The most common would be the insider threat, for this organization. Because I have seen a lot of things that an employer or an employee try to do share some of the credentials publicly, right? Or they do for their let's say my friend is in kind of opponent company of mine, let's say I'm in Microsoft, my friend is in Google, right? He's working AWS, and I'm sorry, he's working GCP, working on the GCP modules, and I'm working on the Azure. Now I know some things, he knows some things, we are just sitting. What if I share some insider things which I should not, and he being a security person can implement all those things which I shared, or what if he shares to another person? So the human, the human security is going to be one of the most critical one. But yeah, there is something which you can implement is this CSPM. There's a cloud security posture management and a cloud intrusion detection system. Now, if you go for that, this GCP, the Google Cloud has inbuilt intrusion detection prevention system, IDPS, which can help you to monitor some this logs, monitor some malicious activity done in the background. Right? You can go for that. You can what do you say, hard code your own credentials. You can you should hire a red teamer for your own organization, and you can, when you hire red teamer for your own or your own organization, you have some ideas about your business. It's not some black box testing. It's going to be totally white box. You know everything, source code, the roles, the credentials. In that way you can find some of the things that might not be caught in the social engineering attacks, because in social engineering attacks you already have some pre-information. But if you are in a red teamer from the insider, then you already know this information, and how to prevent from that. So that is something we can implement in organization.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
one of the best thing,
I think
talking about this all things, and there is something which is a container. Now, sometimes, for the container, we don't use the actual image, container, which is backed by the image, right? Your iOS image, or now make sure you use this this images from the trusted, or the verified sources, or or not something older version. Even if you're using Linux Ubuntu 20, where currently it's 2022.04, this LTS version,
20.4,
right? Or you are using this 80, 18.04, because your softwares are compatible with that version. So it might get you in a risk, right? Either you're using Windows or any kind of system, make sure it's kind of up to date with latest patch. And when you talk about the latest patch, you have to do the compatibility test with your software, with your service that you're using. For that, you have to also make changes in your services and all. Like, this is something very kind of complicated and tough task, because it's not just about updating software; it's about maintaining the stability, right?
Yeah.
So
You mentioned something about side channel attacks, and even though like most cloud platform providers have a lot of secure defaults baked in the end, they are providing services that are supposed to be as configurable as possible.
exactly.
And for example, if you ever run up a Docker instance, like switching to containers, and again, like most cloud providers are just going to give you containers in different shapes or forms. If you ever get into a container, by default, you are root inside that container.
Yeah.
So if you ever get out of that container, if you're able to do a container breakout, you've already lost everything immediately. But going back to the side channel attacks that you were talking about, GCP especially, they do this thing called integrity management, where the moment you have signed an image and pushed it to your VM instance, from the time of the image creation to booting to the first time it boots up to the first time your application is run on it, at every single point of the chain, they try to keep records of the system image. So the base image is signed, the base image signed with your applications is signed, the base image while running is also signed. And if I happen to find that any of these have been tampered, that VM is just destroyed. It's just taken down and another instance is created.
Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, like it is getting much more, a lot more difficult to break them. But I think that is the whole idea of like, the whole purple team aspect of things, where we try to break it so that it becomes very difficult for somebody who's actually trying to do something malicious cannot do it.
Yeah. But actually, like even though you find some difficulties, like it may take
Hmm.
time. At the end, your software is going to be, your CSRD, or your pipeline, your
Yeah,
container is going to be secured.
Yeah.
definitely.
Awesome. So I think we're out of time right now, so we should
Yeah.
probably wrap up the show.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I
there's
would love to keep going,
much
but
more
yeah.
we can talk about. It's going to be never-ending conversation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would love to keep going, but yeah, we can absolutely do this another time. We'll have some more scenarios ready for you.
Yeah. Right.
So
For example, right now the conversation is going. I'm sure, there is a person, who just found a 0 day on any kind of, the CI/CD pipeline, configuration,
mhm.
or or any, this
Yeah,
container security or the Kubernetes.
yeah. You seem to have some fans in the comments as well. So
Okay.
yeah. Awesome. So, and anyway, thanks so much for joining us here. This was a really interesting session, and I want to continue doing more things like this, where we try something different, have a little
Yeah.
bit more interaction,
Mhm.
sort of like where we present certain scenarios. I think this is something that our viewers also really enjoyed. So, if
Huh.
you did, please let us know in the comments, and also do let us know what you'd like to see from us next time on a Friday Fireside chat, or maybe a live code with Ganga or one of the other team members. We would love to, actually give you guys what you want in terms of interesting content, some cutting edge content on YouTube and all of that. So please do let us know. And before we log off, don't forget to get into the description and find our Google form link to the DevSecOps Bundle giveaway. That is going to be an amazing giveaway. And as Ganga said earlier, we are releasing a bunch of new DevSecOps challenges specifically in this year, within the next maybe couple of months. So that is something you can absolutely look forward to if you are one of the lucky winners. And Heath as well mentioned a
Coupon
code,
code.
right? Like a coupon code, right?
Yeah.
So we will drop that in the comments as well, and you can take advantage of that as well. So thanks so much for joining, guys, and thank you so much for to our viewers for joining us and staying for this entire thing. I'm sure you guys really learned something new and enjoyed this, and I certainly learned something new. So I'm really looking forward to more of this sort of stuff. Thanks so much, Heath. See you around.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was
Thank you
fun.
so much for inviting me. It was very fun talking to you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was fun.
awesome. See ya. Bye
Bye bye.
bye.
Bye.